Moving on, we now have a fireside chat on the topic amplifying digital value at the core for a competitive advantage. Our speakers for the session are Elizabeth Theophil, Chief Technology Transformation Officer, Novartis, and Hud Kaim Makami, Head of Shared Services and Technology, BNY Mellon. And chairing this session is Shalini Pillai, Office Managing Partner, KPMG India. Shalini is responsible for the firm's business in the Bengaluru market, managing several key accounts and client relationships, liaising with industry associations and anchoring the firm's brand presence. It's a pleasure to have all of you here with us this afternoon. Over to you, Shalini.
Thank you, Justin, and good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be at the GCC NASSCOM conclave yet again, and after a year that has been absolutely unprecedented. I love the opening to the conclave where Dev Jani really spoke about the infinite game that we're all gearing up for. Think digital, think India, the talent nation. And this session today is really about looking at how we are all looking to amplify digital value at the absolute core, so as to really build a competitive advantage. Over the last 18 odd months, more so than ever before, we've all seen technology get embedded at absolutely every element of the business value chain. It has actually helped blur geographic borders, again, like never before. We've actually seen an absolutely shrinking gap between the ultimate customer and what gets done out of GCC several thousands miles away. The ability to influence and impact outcome is something we've all experienced. Listening into the sessions so far, I think it's more than evident the kind of changes, the kind of impact that one has seen get delivered out of the GCCs. It has become a norm to look at what can get delivered in an as-a-service model. With technology influencing pretty much everything, it's not just software aspects, it's not just leveraging new tech, but whether it's managing your devices as a service, managing program management as a service, analytics, automation as a service, so on and so forth. But the impact that's being driven across every aspect is absolutely unbelievable. What we are going to talk about today is delve into a little more detail. And we have with us two fantastic speakers, leaders with phenomenal experience from a digital technology perspective, and they actually straddle two industries which I believe are absolutely recession-proof. We're going to chat with leaders from the healthcare and financial services industry, two industries that have actually been impacted and have seen models change in a very, very different way. They're going to talk to us a little about their own experiences of leveraging that technology to make the difference, to drive the impact for the consumer life cycle, which these sectors impact across that consumer life cycle. So with that little prelude, with great pleasure, I'd like to invite Elizabeth Theophil, also known as Liz, to join us today. Liz is the Chief Technology Officer at Novartis. She has actually come in and made a huge difference in terms of the practice of medicine through a future-fit technology strategy, enterprise architecture, digital technology enabling platforms, and advanced analytics and automation. Liz has worked actually across a diverse set of industries prior to her stint at Novartis, and she is going to bring all of this experience to bear. Her focus has been really on delivering new customer experiences and operational excellence with cutting-edge technology transformation to really reimagine medicine at Novartis. By the way, I must add, Liz has also lived not just in many countries across like the US, UK, France, but she's been here in India, had a short stint here, been involved in building and actually setting up the Global Delivery Center. So we're going to hear some first-hand experiences on the model itself. Welcome, Liz. Pleasure to have you here today with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Shalini. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much to NASSCOM for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. And to get us started, Liz, I can't help but get to what we've seen at the core of this pandemic, right? I mean, all eyes have been on the life sciences sector, on the pharmaceutical industry. And we've actually seen the industry have to cope with timelines and crunched delivery schedules like never before. Would actually love to hear from you how you've seen life sciences as a sector combined with what technology can do, really unleashing the power to deliver to the outcomes expected. Take us through some of your examples through this pandemic.
Yeah, Shalini, it's very true. And, what our industry across the globe has experienced is that, technology is really playing a crucial role in how we do the digital acceleration. And maybe I can give you some examples that we've seen, across healthcare and life sciences. So, for example, IoT-enabled decentralized clinical trials, right? Working with patients remotely using devices, which, ultimately reduces the overall time of clinical trials and the costs associated with that. We've also seen in supply chain, leveraging data and analytics by building, predictive AI models for smart supply chain. That helps, optimize and automate the supply and demand management. And that really avoids, stockouts and distribution delays. The one that I really enjoy, which really is about the customer experience, is what we've done around commercial and the marketing space. So when the pandemic hit, this whole virtual engagement, with HCPs and physicians, leveraging, novel digital channels of engagement for go-to-market models. And then telemedicine, if you think about it, I'm sure you had the experience as well, especially, during COVID and really the management of, proactively alerting us, if we were at risk at any point, but telemedicine approaches for diagnostics across various therapeutic areas. So, I mean, the list is long, but it's very encouraging, Shalini. And pre-pandemic, I can tell you, our industry was gradually easing towards many of these solutions, but it certainly demonstrates how destructive innovation can be accelerated to leverage technology during a crisis.
Absolutely. And I think what better example when you look at accelerated innovation here, really. I mean, you've spoken of the impact on clinical trials, the ability to access that diverse talent pool using IoT. You've touched upon supply chain. You've spoken of the whole customer commercial experience and telemedicine and consultation, really taking it out to the masses. Is there one technology that you believe has really made that difference, Liz, as you look at it across the board? Is there one that stands out for you more than others?
Yeah. For me, Shalini, it's really about the platforms where you're able to host all your data. I mean, everything that I've just talked about there is really all about your data strategy and the direction that you take for managing your data. Without that, none of these things are possible. So building robust platforms around data and analytics is certainly key and really gives you the edge and the competitive advantage. And many companies struggle with that. It's really a journey, but it's fundamental and crucial to be able to accelerate the digital transformation.
Sure. And that gets me to the other question, which I really would love to hear your views since you've set up the center here for Novartis, Liz. But when you look at the GCC model, and everyone's been talking about creating technology hubs, some have successfully done so, many in the process of doing so. But as you bring together all new technologies in a clustered format, leveraging the very rich skill talent pool that India has to offer across a wide spectrum of new technologies. Tell us how you've seen this model work for you. I mean, there are others who are early in the journey, so would love to hear your first-hand experiences.
So it's really been a long and enriching journey, and it just continues to give. I think for me, the secret to success is all about the approach to hiring, retaining, and building the tech talent. It's not a secret, Shalini. There is a war for tech talent out there, especially in India, right? We're all fishing in the same pond. So your employee value proposition really needs to be compelling enough to ensure that your team are able to really be risk takers and to pioneer new ideas and innovation. So the adaptive approach that we've taken at Novartis is really to build a really strong technical leaders that actually have global functional responsibility, and they lead global teams from our delivery centers. And that means that they're empowered to make strategic decisions. I've also been a big sponsor and pioneer of nurturing talent coming from the technology colleges. You mentioned earlier, yes, I spent many months in Calcutta, developing a new delivery center for an organization. And I think that really goes way back in my career, where I learned a lot about what happens in India and how it operates. I've been truly impressed by the technology colleges and the advantages that they give to students. So we've been pioneering, and I've been a big sponsor of bringing those college students in and nurturing, develop them and grow them. And, another example is I set up a robotics and cognitive automation center of excellence in Hyderabad. Okay. And, that team was built from the ground up, hiring a mix of mature process automation engineers, as well as technical specialists, very well seasoned and experienced leaders who partnered directly with the business to solve some of the most challenging opportunities at scale. So this area, can have significant impact for the business. And I'm a big fan of diversity and inclusion. Being a woman in tech myself, I really I pay special attention to that, Shalini, and it's really a personal passion of mine. So continue to grow and nurture talent and pioneer new ideas and experimentation.
And that passion comes through, Liz. Absolutely, it does. Whether it is, like you said, just the passion for nurturing the talent, whether it's bringing in the diversity quotient, which is critical. And we heard some of that from the earlier sessions today. But really at the core, like you said, it's platforms that's driving the change, steering the change through and across your many aspects of your business life cycle. And I think, so as I hear you say, the center is absolutely playing to that agenda and helping you impact every part of that process, which is really wonderful to hear and see some of those. And we've seen examples of what the life sciences sector has done for all of us through the pandemic. And you're talking and giving us some of those live examples. And as we kind of look at the road ahead, again, I go back to Debjani's reference of this infinite game, and we're gearing up for the future. Give us a little peek, Liz, into what that future looks like. Where do you see the Novartis GCC, your tech hub, headed? Give us a little bit of that peek into it. And if you had to leave one word of advice or a recommendation to those who have not yet experienced the power of this model, what would you have to say?
Our industry continues to evolve, and at Novartis, I mean, we're very fortunate. We get to solve some of the most complex healthcare problems, so, and that's with leveraging technology. So we're now very focused, especially with my organization, on redesigning the organization and operating model for digital acceleration. And that is mainly centered around product management, creating agility and speed, right? So these new models will require a change in leadership and employee mindsets, because behaviors are at the center of that, because it's important to have the right level of skills, values and behaviors at an enterprise level in order to respond to the acceleration of our digital initiatives at Novartis. So our Novartis Global Service Centers that we have across the world, but obviously in India, over the years, we've developed great capabilities, platforms in data science, AI, robotics, process automation, cloud engineering, even data engineering, MLOps. And now we're integrating those technologies into the business capabilities for scale. Mm-hmm. So to your question, what would I advise others if they were embarking on this? I would say, really do your homework, do your research, because it is a journey. Talk to organizations like us that have had the experience. We've seen what works well, what doesn't work well, and really make sure you've aligned your technology capabilities and also the needs of that to the business expectations. Start small. Don't be bold enough to hire lots of people, but empower strong leaders, develop and grow the talent, and really build the right strategic partnerships, because you'll need them too. But unfortunately, Shalini, there's not a quick fix, right? If you really want to get it right, you have to go through the journey.
Now that's fantastic. A bunch of very useful and very pragmatic pointers for those who are early in the journey, Liz. And of course, to your point, it's not a quick fix, but I think there are advantages others have from listening into this, because there are experiences that they can make sure they use to actually crunch the learning cycle and flatten that learning curve really. So this has been fantastic, Liz. Would have loved to do a deep dive with you on some of those platforms, but I'm conscious of time. And on that note, would just like to say a big thank you, Liz. Wonderful to be connecting with you and chatting over this session today. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Shalini, and thank you, NASSCOM. Have a good session. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was an interesting session. When you actually look at life sciences combined with what technology is doing to change that business model, that life cycle, it is quite amazing. And now to continue on this journey of looking at how digital at the very core is transforming the world around us and actually giving organizations a competitive advantage, I'm going to invite our second speaker today, someone I'm going to be in conversation with over the next few minutes. Again, from a very interesting and a very different industry, the financial services sector. One that I again believe is absolutely integral to what drives consumer behavior, what's changing in that consumer life cycle. With that, let me introduce to you our next speaker today, Hood. Hood heads shared services and technology at BNY Mellon. Someone who's been absolutely at the core of technology, transforming the bank's core platforms, transforming the front to back processes, absolutely at the core of the automation transformation agenda for the bank. Someone who also actually has served as head of India operations and technology, bringing together culture, purpose, several other elements for the bank, and with technology at the core. Pleasure to have you here with us today, Hood. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Shalini, for having me, and great session with Liz.
Thank you. Thank you, and looking forward to the next few minutes with you. And as we get started and warmed up, Hood, I cannot help but open this up to really talk about specifically what the last 18 months have been like. I mean, the world has seen technology adoption at a really frantic pace, almost like there's no tomorrow. And would love to hear your thoughts on what this has meant for you in terms of an industry that is highly regulated, one that is experiencing consumer behavior like never before, preferences that we didn't even know existed, right? You've seen new entrants into the play. The lines that define financial services as a sector have blurred with all of what telecom and technology is doing to the sector. So we'd love to hear your views and your take on summing up what the last 18 months have been like as you see it.
It's a great question. So the last 18 months for me have been, I think for all of us, a giant experiment in whether or not we could work virtually. And I think we have a shared experience around products like Zoom or Teams. So I don't need to get into what we can do virtually. I think what that experiment has yet to deliver on is the gaps that have been left as a result of not being face-to-face. If we want to make a real case for change post-pandemic, the kind of change where working in a virtual environment becomes the norm, then I think we still have to discover and scale sustainable digital alternatives to a handful of what I consider the huge positives for being in the office, right? So those are things like we can break bread together. We can be in non-work mode with each other, that human connection that digital, I don't think yet fully delivers on. Second would be that we can whiteboard together in a way that picks up subtle facial signals, body language for everyone in the room, not just the one person that you're speaking with or the three people across the top. That includes like eye contact, fidgeting, crossed arms, yawns, human factors. The third gap that the digital, I think, has yet to deliver on is that we work harder when others are around us. That's a psychological truth. That social influence aspect, that engagement aspect is something that we as a community need to really focus in on. And finally, we signal trust passively, communicating that we're actually working by just showing up at the office. And that's not necessarily true when I show up in Teams or Zoom. And that's very important because autonomy, which is a core principle for a lot of us, and definitely for where in financial services, engineering, autonomy needs transparency and trust. So the last 18 months have been an experiment. I think we still have some unresolved questions and a need to expand that experiment. But for the most part, we've been able to hit every client expectation, regulatory expectation, and peer expectation in an environment that it has, where digital has really stepped up to deliver.
Well, that's so beautifully summarized. I love the concept of this giant experiment, which still has gaps we need to bridge. And one couldn't have said it better, right? I mean, this virtual hybrid that we're all working in, and you gave some fantastic thoughts around how do you bridge those gaps, whether it is those little elements of human touch that are so critical. And I know AI has come a long way trying to do that, but there's so much longer to go in terms of bridging that gap. So that's a fantastic summary, Hood. As I kind of take away from that and yet look at what new technology is doing for us, there's so much spoken around how technology is driving innovation, delivering impact and outcome, making our world smaller, blurring geographical borders, and yet in all of this helping us get more resilient. It would be wonderful to hear you give us perhaps a few examples of what either you're working on or have experienced, or your thoughts. And maybe I'll take each of those one at a time. And the first one perhaps is your take on technology really driving innovation.
So it's an important question to ask. So a lot of companies today continue the thinking around having centers of innovation centers, where you take a floor in a 20-story tower and you say that the 15th floor is just, we're gonna make it look like Google. We're gonna just operate differently, and it's going to be a hotbed of innovation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great step forward if you didn't have that. But I do think that it begs the question, what about the other floors? We need to kind of move away from an innovation center mindset to an innovation everywhere mindset, where it's an expectation, a cognitive demand of every individual in a company to help pass raise that bar. And probably the best example is what the industry is calling low-code, no-code platforms, where we can take citizens and make them into citizen developers. So whether you are an engineer or a non-engineer, low-code, no-code platforms can allow that innovation mindset to be ubiquitous across the entire enterprise. So that's probably my one example.
And I love that. It kind of reminds you how technology is truly a leveler of sorts, right? I mean, suddenly there's a level playing field for everyone out there to contribute. And much has been spoken about innovation centers. And the minute you try to bring it everywhere, like you said, it just changes and multiplies the power of what you can achieve if you embed it across the organization. So that's absolutely fantastic. And moving from there, when you kind of hence look at technology delivering impact, again, innovation amongst all else, what would come to mind, Hood?
So for me, technology, when done correctly, does two things. It empowers our most resourceful talent, our people, to operate at the next level. And technology delivers on the promise of a better operating model. And it's that operating model impact that I think technology shines. Technology allows us to deliver a different operating discipline, to go from being regional to being genuinely global.
Yeah.
And part of what we have to do is be intentional, Shalini, about that exact operating model change. I think technology's real impact is going to be how it transforms the way we work with each other across the globe.
Because you actually also head and oversee the India operations. And I'm curious, because this whole conclave, Hood, is about global capability center. So it's really speaking to the core of that operating model and how technology has actually enabled this. So given that you've been at the helm of setting up and running and managing something like this, how do you see this model when you really look at delivering impact? Any comments on that?
Absolutely. Look, the way we mature an operating model from what is fundamentally a regional mindset to a genuinely global mindset, I think it's a structural power play that we need to make. And what I mean by that is we still have across a lot of companies heads of India. Mm-hmm. And my role, as an example, and I think places that have my role really need to struggle with whether or not they are moving towards a genuinely global operating model. That's a direct indictment of myself and my role. Why? Because what having a global head of India does is it allows the US and EMEA to think differently about important values like justice and equity, mm-hmm. global justice, global equity. So let me give you an example. If half of my workforce is in India, in my company, and I look at the power structures of who reports to who at the highest levels. Mm-hmm. What a lot of companies continue to do is to say, I'm a senior person, I have 10 direct reports, half of my people are in India, and it's okay for one of my 10 direct reports to be the head of India.
Yeah.
I think it's fundamentally an inequity. It is a social justice issue. And if we are to take India to the next level, we have to challenge the underlying social dynamic and say that representative management globally should be an aspiration for all of us. So in that example where 50% of my employees work in India, 50% of my leadership should be in India. 50% of the functions that I support should be led out of India. Without the last 20 years of excuses about our clients are in the US, or our seniors or our businesses in the US. That double standard of the last 20 years of excuses it is a double standard because US businesses have clients in India. They have mm-hmm. clients in the Pacific, Asia Pacific region, and they're not struggling managing them. So I do think that the maturity curve for those of us with a commitment to India is to not just use the language of partnership, which I think we all do, right? I think it's to rebalance the power structures that allow real power to continue to stay in the US and in EMEA. And you know, we're going to need champions because the letting go of power is not something that the powerless do.
Right.
The sharing of power starts with those that have the power. And I think the role of leadership in India, myself included, should be to agitate for that change. Agitate is the right word because we need a social movement. We need to think in terms of the dynamics of social movements to be able to make that kind of change, that kind of purpose-driven change.
I absolutely love the way you champion the cause, and you kind of really sold on the model, right? You see how it kind of mirrors your global footprint, and hence rightfully levels, like you said, from a justice and parity perspective, and of course unleashes power of what you can do from a center out of here. And I'm kind of going to move to one final question for you, Hood, which is, you know, when you, and some wonderful experiences, but when you look at you're staring into that crystal ball, gazing into the future, I'm very curious as to how and where do you see the future headed? And is there something about that future and what you see that also bothers you perhaps a bit?
I'll tie the answer, Shalini, back to what we just talked about. I think I'm hopeful that the maturing of the global model away from what is still in many places a regional model will allow the full potential of not just leaders, but the entire body that is our India workforce to really have the kind of autonomy, the kind of purpose that isn't there when we are staff augmentation. That purpose-driven future is the only future if we are to focus on the needs of both the East and the West. So my fear remains my fear of the last 50 years as I've lived, which is that arc of that longer arc of justice will take longer than maybe our kids deserve. So it's such an imperative for us to treat the interactions with our partners in the US and in EMEA with an urgency to change the structural problems that leave most of the power in the hands of the existing powerful.
And thank you for that, Hood. And I must admit, I haven't heard someone who's as focused on technology bring together the meaning of purpose as beautifully as you just summed it up, because you've kind of over the last few minutes taken us through how powerful technology can be in terms of bringing about that parity, in terms of driving innovation, and like you rightly said, not through an innovation center, but embedding it across the entire model, so to speak, and yet talking of how powerful the model can be in terms of delivering the impact. And yet I go back to where we started to say, this has been one big experiment, one giant experiment, like you rightly said, with a few critical gaps to be plugged, but with all of what technology promises to deliver, whether it's trying to simulate those sensory human traits that you called out, how do you replace or try and bring in the coffee machine conversations and the water cooler talks into, like you said, the feeling of breaking bread together, and yet bring in working collaboratively. I think it's amazing what technology has the power to do, and yet speak and link to something that is so human, right? The power of purpose. So I thought this was fantastic.
I actually think you touched on it brilliantly, which is the real power of technology is to actually make us more human. And I think if we think of it that way, we have a brighter future ahead.
That's awesome. And on that note, Hood, I will sum up, because when we have leaders such as yourself, and as the industry looks at the models evolving, I think the human race is certainly headed in the right direction. So thank you yet again, Hood, for your time. It was wonderful chatting with you. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, Shalini.
Thank you, Shalini, and thank you to our speakers, Elizabeth and Hood, for that informative and insightful chat.